such a pleasure to be here, and I also wanted to thank, of course, the organizers, and thinking, of course, on a personal note, it's my first time in Egypt, so what a wonderful place to have a conversation about trade, because Cairo and Egypt have been, connecting regions and markets and ideas for, I was going to say centuries, but it's millennia, So really an amazing place to have this conversation, so thank you. And indeed, in terms of where, coming back to Hamid's question and what we're here to discuss is, what has the global business community been living through? What are we seeing? And really, where are we seeing the key challenges? And of course, what needs to be done from our perspective to help move things forward and to get back to what I would call a positive, forward-looking trade agenda? I think in terms of where we are from the perspective of the global business community, and we're now in November, so I don't think it's too early to call this, but this has really been a year unlike any other in recent memory. And of course, there has been the shock from the United States at the start of the year, the reciprocal tariffs, and a lot of attention has been understandably spent on that, and of course, the bilateral discussions. And from the business perspective, the ensuing uncertainty, I think if we all see from the headlines, has just been really navigating in the dark and not knowing which way things are going. And as we always say, not doing anything is not a business strategy. So the immobilization is really hurting. But I wanted to note, and I think it's important, it's not just the United States that businesses from trading across borders are facing. And it's not new. This is, I think Simon already started with this, but we've been seeing, and ICC has been talking about this for a long time, is the rising trade barriers, the rising protectionism. And really what we just saw this year in extent was sort of at the apex of this, and that we can no longer ignore it. And so it's not coming only from the US, but traders are facing tariff and non-tariff barriers across the world. It was one of our members said to me, said, Valerie, it's, trying to figure out new tariff codes while also preparing for CBAM, which comes into implementation and at the start of next year, it's like trying to change the tire on a moving car. And I think we know where that's going to end. So the question we're asking ourselves is, of course we know that business is going to adapt, business is going to still trade, but the question is, at what cost and who's going to be left standing at the end of all of this if we don't sort of, in a very urgent way, really start to address these issues. And so, from an IC perspective, Hamid mentioned it, ICC, we're the institutional representative of 45 million businesses in over 170 countries. 70% of our membership is in developing economies, so we see business across the world, but also we were founded in 1919 out of the ashes of the First World War when a few traders got together and said, there are no rules for international trade. We need rules because this will help, of course, contribute to economic prosperity and ultimately peace. And they called themselves the Merchants of Peace. And that remains in our DNA today. And here we are talking again about a rules-based international trading system and the importance of rules. And so we're coming back to first principles. And if anything we've seen this year, and I think, is that we need the rules. And I think there's that, at least there's been that acknowledgement this year. And we, as I see, we looked and we said, okay, let's look and see what would happen today if there were no World Trade Organization. What would that mean for developing economies? And we commissioned an independent study from Oxford Economics, and the results were extremely stark. For developing economies across the board, it would mean a 33% drop in non-fuel goods exports and a permanent hit to GDP of 5%. That's enormous. So the welfare benefits of the World Trade Organization and the multilateral trading system should not be underappreciated. And we actually did a follow-up study where we wanted to do a deeper dive looking at 10 developing economies. And we chose a selection because to have different markets, different sizes, different places, and we looked at, I always forget a few, but India, South Africa, Vietnam, Indonesia, Turkey, Guatemala, China, Brazil, and also Egypt. And what we found was the results were consistent with our regional study that we had done. And incidentally, of course, for Africa, it would be among the hardest hit with above 40% hit to exports. For Egypt, the good news is that you were of the 10 economies we looked at, among the least impacted. But the bad news was even least impacted was still very impacted, around 20% for exports and a 3% hit to GDP. So we wanted to use these numbers just to remind ourselves what's at stake. And I can't remember, maybe it was Alan who said, the system is not perfect. It needs to be improved, and we recognize that, but it is critical. So with that in mind, with this, what do we from the global business community want to see at the next ministerial? Because we see there is an opportunity coming up when ministers get together in Yaoundé at the end of March to discuss the pressing issues facing the World Trade Organization. And we've kept our asks or our very targeted, because we do realize sort of the complexity of the current environment. And what we're asking for is the launch of a reform round, and we can call it what you want, but what we're looking for is, can there finally be structured, time-bound discussions, even among a subset of members, because we realize that consensus will be elusive among 166 members. And in particular, and Alan sort of alluded to this, there's this need to address threshold issues around consensus, around plurilaterals, around special and differential treatment. So and if those can be addressed, our view is then we can unlock the negotiating function and get to what business really wants, is an updated rule book so that it can address really critical issues like digital trade, like trade and sustainability, but also things like subsidies, which cannot be addressed bilaterally. So those need to be looked at on a multilateral level, because there's just no point if only 2 countries address it. We're not going to solve the problem. But we also recognize, and I think this is important, that we're no longer, I think to come back to the start of the discussion where I think it was Hamid who said, we're not going backwards, and we're in a new era. And in this new era, the model of 1995 does not fit 2025. So we as the business community, we're pragmatic, we know this. So we also recognize that one-size-fit model today won't necessarily work, and we need to introduce more flexibility. It doesn't mean à la carte, as they say in French, but it means just enough flexibility so that to keep all the members at the table. And the metaphor that I like to use when I think about this is, at the moment, as I alluded to, businesses are facing we're in a tsunami. It's a perfect storm, 2025, with just so many pressures on businesses, and I mentioned it wasn't just tariffs and all of this. But if you look at and this is true whether it's a business or whether it's a system, if you think about a storm, and it's the old trees with the very thick trunks that end up, when the storm is over and they've all, they're lying on the ground and they've broken. But it's the trees that have a little bit of flexibility, but remain rooted. I think that's quite important, that survive the storm. So that's the image that I have in mind. So can we introduce the flexibilities needed to save the system, essentially? And we do recognize it's not easy. I think we need to be pragmatic, but business is really willing to step up. Am I at time? And you're looking looking at me. I'm going to wrap up. Business is really wants to be there, part of the reform process, and also critically as an outcome, because I think that's one of the weaknesses, that we're not able to, in a structured way, engage in all the technical work happening. And I'll just also end, of course, with the importance of renewing the moratorium as part of this discussion. So I'll stop there and hand it back to Hamid before he grabs the mic from me.